inventing an indestructible.
It's sorry, it's jumped to something else. Be with you in a sec.
This affordable drone was invented by an ex-product developer. Arthur Bell worked at a well-known drone company.
Don't you love technology?
This is Bill Putnam. I'm a climate scientist at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center.
Right. Hopefully you can now see the screen. Yes?
Yes.
Off we go then.
Hi, this is Bill Putnam. I'm a climate scientist at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. What you're looking at is a supercomputer model of carbon dioxide levels in the Earth's atmosphere. The visualization compresses 1 year of data into a few minutes. Carbon dioxide is the most important greenhouse gas affected by human activity. About half of the carbon dioxide emitted from fossil fuel combustion remains in the atmosphere, while the other half is absorbed by natural land and ocean reservoirs. In the Northern Hemisphere, we see the highest concentrations are focused around major emission sources over North America, Europe, and Asia. Notice how the gas doesn't stay in one place. The dispersion of carbon dioxide is controlled by the large-scale weather patterns within the global circulation. During spring and summer in the Northern Hemisphere, plants absorb a substantial amount of carbon dioxide through photosynthesis, thus removing some of the gas from the atmosphere. We see this change in the model as the red and purple colors start to fade. Meanwhile, in the Southern Hemisphere, we see the release of another pollutant, carbon monoxide. This is a gas that's both harmful to the environment and to humans. During the summer months, plumes of carbon monoxide stream from fires in Africa, South America, and Australia, contributing to high concentrations in the atmosphere. Notice how these emissions are also transported by winds to other parts of the world. As summer transitions to fall and plant photosynthesis decreases, carbon dioxide begins to accumulate in the atmosphere. Although this change is expected, we're seeing higher concentrations of carbon dioxide accumulate in the atmosphere each year. This is contributing to the long-term trend of rising global temperatures. The Orbiting Carbon Observatory 2, or OCO2, will be the first NASA satellite mission to provide a global view of carbon dioxide. OCO2 observations and atmospheric models like GEOS-5 will work closely together to better understand both human emissions and natural fluxes of carbon dioxide. This will help guide climate models toward more reliable predictions of future conditions across the globe.
Thanks, folks. So a few more people have joined us. That's great. That little video that was running as you were arriving there.
The industry has been written off the public for more than a decade because the majority of people don't know this.
Is to do with carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide release. And you see the seasonal changes that go on there. Relevant to this presentation is the fact that one of those major causes for release of carbon dioxide is tillage. Of course, it's also about industrial pollution, and it's about how we heat our homes and factories and workplaces in the winter months as well. So it's not all about ploughing, but that is one major contributor. I'm going to share the screen again in a moment. and we have a PowerPoint presentation here. I hope this isn't death by PowerPoint. It's really just to remind Charlie and I what we wanted to say to you and to give some illustrations of the points we're going to make. This will run for about 40 minutes. There'll be a couple of points in the presentation when we do ask for you to contribute. And at the end of that time, the second half of the presentation is entirely in your hands to ask any questions, give any answers you have, and raise any comments that you feel are relevant or points for discussion. Just before we move on to that, does anybody have any questions? If so, can you put them in the chat? Do we all know how to use chat? If you don't, please ask. Okay. So whoever's not speaking amongst the three of us will be watching out for any comments you have and questions. If you have a point or a question and it doesn't get answered straight away, do not despair, because we'll come back to it after the presentation. So I'm going to share my screen again, and then we'll kick off. Hopefully from the start. Right, can you see that, folks? Hello?
Not yet.
Okay. Try again.
Hello. Yep.
Okay, good. Off we go. So we had various ideas about what we might call this presentation, and in the end we settled for Charlie's suggestion, which is common sense farming. So let's introduce ourselves. Charlie.
Hi, I'm an organic farmer in southwest Scotland. Lots of sheep, lots of trees, lots of ponds, and concerned about the future.
I'm Graham Bell. I live in the Scottish borders in the longest standing intentional food forest garden in Britain. I'm also the longest serving permaculture teacher in Britain who's still working. And I have been an agricultural training board instructor and trainer of trainers that later on morphed into becoming called Lantra. And I was lead teacher for the Countryside Premium Scheme in Scotland whilst it ran. Yeah, I'm concerned for the future too. So it'd be nice to know who you folks are. And what I would suggest is if you just type in the chat, I mean, here are some suggestions of how we might categorize ourselves. Are you a farmer? Maybe you work in the process industry. Maybe you educate people. Maybe you're a consumer. Well, we're all consumers. So it'd be nice to have a little bit of feedback, folks, about how you see yourselves. Whatever the answers, and you can keep putting them in as we're talking here, none of us are bystanders. We're all involved. We're all involved because we all enjoy the countryside, hopefully. We all eat food. Some of us grow food. Some of us grow lots of food, and some of us grow little. It's not a competition. It's about the fact that we all have concerns about where we're at the moment and where are we going in future. And if you're involved, you'll be committed to something. So, a rhetorical question, what are you committed to? I mean, if there's particular reasons for you being on this conference, it'd be nice to know what those are. Here's some thoughts that we came across. Farming, one way or another, is about quality food. Quality food means adequate quality, adequate nutritional value, adequate availability, affordability. And that requires care in all sorts of ways. First and foremost, for sustainable farming to work, we need to be caring for the land. And nothing is more important than the soil. This isn't possible unless we're also caring for the people. That's the workers who grow the food, who harvest it, the people who process it, the people who add value to the raw material of food, and the consumers who enjoy the produce, hopefully. But the environment at large is about many other things as well. And two key issues, which we will touch on here, is air. Well, we've just had a little demonstration about carbon dioxide and so on, but water also. We can't live for more than a few minutes without air. We can't live for more than a few days without water, but society cannot exist without soil. And our intention is that we should also be respecting wildlife in the way that we use the landscape. Within permaculture, we talk about earth care, people care, fair shares. And that earth care means that as far as we're concerned, everything that's a living being on earth has a right to be here. So what we're trying to do in this presentation is look at how we farm with nature rather than trying to control it. How we can use what nature does to do work for us and to reduce the amount of work we have to do. And crucially, none of this is going to work unless it's economically stable. And there'll be more detail about that shortly. So, some of you may recognise this guy. He's in the Scottish borders town of Moffat, well, just into Dumfries and Galloway. A ram, statue to a ram. I've asked many times how many countries in the world have statues to sheep. I gather they do in New Zealand as well. Such an important part of the upland farming economy, and that in turn feeds into the lowland economy. Much of the sheep market takes sheep bred in hardy conditions in uplands and finishes them off in the lowlands. I like the fact that the sheep's on top. We need farmers to be back on top, and I often feel they're not. And for this to happen, it's really important that we reach an understanding between farmers and environmentalists. I'm not entirely in favour of bracketing people in this way, but these are common phrases you hear. We all must be allies and not opposing each other. Charlie, your turn.
Farming, as you see there, needs people. A lot of farmers are very isolated. They live in isolation, long way from anywhere, and often feel alienated by the pressures on them from environmental concerns to paperwork, etc. So to do that, we need people on the farm. We need people to come onto the farm that will help us achieve what's wanted. Not in a way of thou shalt do this or thou shalt not do that, but people from, like, for example, the RSPB, water managers, SEPA, woodlanders, that can help the farm become a more environmental place, but also allow us to keep producing what we need to feed people and to be financially sustainable. So that's where it comes in. That's where you start getting a cross-reference of people working together to produce something more than the farmer would himself, who's probably totally focused on getting as much profit as he can without seeing necessarily the profit that could be made from other things. Is there another slide, Graham? But young people are absolute essential to all this. The average age of a farmer, I think, is 60 in the UK. And there's no room to people. We need to get young people on. We need their ideas, their energy, their learning, their feedback. Why are you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? And just as Graham's written there, all the other things that young people bring to the party, we need their energy. They need to be learning from us. We need to be teaching them. Are you on this one, Graham?
If you like. So at the moment, just over half of our food consumed is grown here. 26% of our imports currently come from the EU, and whatever happens with Brexit, I don't personally see that changing enormously. 4% each from Africa, Asia, North and South America, and 2% from elsewhere. Of course, not all exports are bad. For example, exotics. You know, I personally like to eat oranges and bananas. You can grow oranges and bananas in the UK, but the energy cost makes it a ridiculous thing to be doing, basically. But essentially, this does beg a question of how self-reliant are we? We also export. This is a graph from 2009 to 2019. And what you can see is a steady increase, but this is by value, not by amount. So my suggestion is that actually our export levels are pretty much level, but the prices have gone up in that time. However, there is definitely an increase there from just over 6 billion to just over 10 billion. Time alone will tell the effect of Brexit on that pattern. Who knows? So we're not self-sufficient. 48% comes from elsewhere of what we eat. But what we need is that balance between imports and a thriving agricultural sector that feeds ourselves. So remember, as well as slightly more than half of the food we eat coming from here, we are also exporting. So, you know, we are in a position of some strength, but perhaps not strong enough in terms of production. So between 1945 and 1975, food production actually doubled in the UK. That's something we have to be really grateful to farmers for. That's an amazing achievement in 30 years. There are some negatives about it as well, and we'll come to those later. Personally, I never thought we got a great deal from joining the EU, although I'm a Remainer myself. I would have preferred us to stay in the EU for many more reasons than this. But clearly the deal we got served some purposes well, but not others. So our fishing was pretty much wiped out by the fact that we weren't allowed to go and fish in other places, but the Spanish, for example, were allowed to come and fish here. That there was no support for horticulture in this country because that was perceived as something that happened in the Mediterranean countries. So Brexit does give us the opportunity to reset all of these things and get fairer deals for everybody. The current COVID crisis is a very clear message that so many things can be done better. There are so many things not going well in this crisis. And there is the possibility that climate change may allow us to grow more exotic crops further north. But beware, because global warming is not really what's happening. Global warming, if it carries on, will inevitably lead to global cooling. So this is why I prefer the phrase climate change. And a number of people have been saying recently that whilst we're all panicking about COVID-19, it's really climate change we should be worried about. Charlie recommended this book to me last week, and I read it last week. I previously read The Shepherd's Life by James Rebanks, but this is a very perceptive comment. This new farming has proved to be productively brilliant, and we now know ecologically disastrous. So, Charlie, do you want to take over here?
Okay. So everything comes at a price. Between 1945 and 1975, farm employment fell 90%. There's such a mass exodus from the country into the town. 5 million a month, I think I saw somewhere. That's just unbelievable. In the same period, on farm fossil fuel usage has grown eightfold. A personal example, when the chappie comes to my farm to fill up my diesel tank twice a year, 600 gallons, he goes to my neighboring farm every day in the summer. Every day, not with 600 gallons, with a whole tanker load. Because he's a big dairy farmer, loads of silage, loads of tractors. It's a horrific amount of fuel. We're losing topsoil like there's no tomorrow. It's the amount of topsoil we're losing would fill a freight train. It would go twice around the world right now. And wait a minute, I've got to get this figure right. That's the equivalent of the entire grain growing area of Canada is every year is disappearing. Not the whole lot, but it's that whole area just losing topsoil all the time. Average age of farmers over 60, as I've said before. That's why we need youth. That's why we need more people into it. We need more ideas. And we do need more ideas. We're pretty stagnant in this country. If we're looking for ideas, we don't look at our neighbours. We look at New Zealand or Australia or maybe even America for new ideas. There's nothing really exciting happening. And if you are going to talk to a farmer for an idea, first question you ask him, could he manage without the subsidy? If he says no, go and ask somebody else. The debt burden isn't going away. We're used to spending money. We do. Most farmers have got metal disease. They just keep spending on new tractors and machinery. And internationally, farmers are stressed out. There's a high suicide rate. The stress comes from all sorts of things. It comes from increasing bureaucracy by older people having to try and figure out how to do things. Now everything has to be in a computer, which many over 60-year-old farmers have never had to deal with before. The slightest error and you're fined huge amounts of money. And it all builds up to stress, and there's no one to share it with. And farmers do not control their own market. We buy in a wholesale market, we sell in a retail market. I've just sent 100 lambs off to market this morning, and I have no idea what I'm going to get for it. Last year there was a good price. Last week there's a good price. Will it be as good this week? I have no idea. I know how much I've had to put into them, but I've no idea what I'm going to get for them. That makes life pretty stressful as well. Next, Graham. Oh, that's your thing.
So the comment earlier from James Rebanks about environmental, ecological damage and so on. We have precious little tree cover in this country. Of 193 largest countries in the world, we're 163rd. Nearly every developing country in Africa, which people often from here regard as poverty-stricken, has a better tree cover than the UK. Water management, it's becoming worse and worse. Some of it's ridiculous. I mean, when the Somerset levels were flooded a couple of years back, people were blaming the government for not clearing out the watercourses. Well, if you build your house on a floodplain, you're inviting trouble. 28% of housing in the UK built last year was built on floodplains. This is insanity. But we also have problems with the fact that rainfall is rising. Many places in Britain over the last 3 years, it's gone up 50%. And because of the lack of upland tree cover, we get these massive floods coming down the watercourses because the water is not being held back in the landscape. Conversely, sometimes we're getting drought. Farmers in East Anglia were 5 years ago asking that we have a national water grid because they were developing 2-foot cracks in their fields because of the lack of water. But there's another issue with that, is how we're managing the water. And the best place to store water is actually in the soil. Meanwhile, our water table and our watercourses are becoming damaged. And some of it is significantly scary. If, for example, the large cisterns underneath the River Thames and the Thames Valley, if they run out of water, there's a risk that these things will collapse. And when they collapse, they won't refill. Many watercourses are in a dire state. And actually, there are no rivers in Britain which are perfect at all. Wildlife, there's another report out yesterday, I see. 97% of wildflower meadow lost since before the Second World War. So, is this the 6th mass extinction of species? Added to all of that, food miles are another burden in the carbon question. And also, we have to ask ourselves, how does that fit with fair shares? How does farmers growing flowers for the market in Britain, in Kenya, shipping them via Amsterdam, how does that represent sustainability? What about the people in Kenya who need food? Why isn't the land being used for their benefit? This report came out in September. This particular quote says 17% are in good health. I've actually got cuttings from other papers pointing out the report actually says that 17% are not as bad as the rest, but none of them are not polluted. Where's that pollution come from? Well, it comes from you and me. It also comes from farms, from runoff, from chemical farming. The chemicals that are used are soluble, end up in the water table, end up in the rivers. It comes from industrial pollution. And it comes from stuff that we put down the drains. So it's not something we can walk away from and blame somebody else for totally. We all have part of the responsibility. Charlie.
Soil. Right, we're losing soils at a phenomenal rate, as I've already said. We've got 60 harvests left by most estimates. We need to increase the organic matter. It used to be organic matter, carbon, it equates to much the same thing. If we can increase the organic matter or the carbon in the soil by 1%, we'll be able to hold another 40,000 gallons of water, or 16,000 gallons of water. You've got the top foot of soil. I think it's less than that. We're losing cropland mainly because of the plough. The plough is really, really difficult because it breaks the soil up, it turns it upside down, exposes it to the atmosphere. And if it's, especially with this drift towards winter cropping, when it's releasing a lot of nitrogen and there's nothing to take it up. In a previous few years, it was more spring cropping. And when spring cropping was the practice, the ground was ploughed up when it was below 6 degrees. Well, I'm talking about the UK here. I'm not talking about other places where it's warmer. And the ground was cold, so there's nothing much leaching. And when the seed was in, when the ground warmed up, there was seed there to take up the released nutrients. Hence the benefit of spring crops over winter crops. If you, oh, I can't find the resource, but the idea that there would be sandstorms in England and dust storms in England was 40 years ago was like unbelievable, but it's there now. We have dust storms in the UK, but this is in areas where there's feet and feet of soil, and it's because the organic matter has been destroyed. Also, the monocropping that we have, you need multi-crops to help the mycorrhiza in soil. Mycorrhiza is crucial for getting nutrients, especially nitrogen and phosphate, into plants. And it also can exploit, the bacteria mycorrhiza can exploit little pockets of water that plant roots can't. And that also feeds the plant. A mixed herbal flora will have a lot more mycorrhiza. Monocropping does not. So we need mycorrhiza, we need mixed crop. We need not to put nitrogen on the ground because it's 60 to 90% is volatile. So we're only getting a fraction of it. Farmers, in my opinion, have been conned a lot into buying things that they don't actually need. Okay, this slide here, Graham's just flagged up. We need what's happening under the ground. There's 10 tons of life under the soil for every ton on top of it. We need lots of them for all sorts of reasons. If you're trying to farm without antibiotics and without vermifuges, then you need all these things at the bottom because they act as competition to the soil-borne parasites. So they'll eat the food that the parasites affect our stock would also want to eat. If you've got a healthy soil, there's a lot less of them. Okay, and here you have the same again. You've got the algae, you've got the bacteria, you've all this. It's just so much happens in the soil. If you had a handful of soil, it'd have more life in it than there are people on the planet. It's just an amazing substance. It's like a huge digestive, aerobic and anaerobic digester producing food for plants. Put a plow through it and you can wreck it. Put too much nitrogen, put a lot of nitrogen on it, you can destroy it. Put too much phosphates on it, it disrupts the balance. Monocrop it, the same thing. If you put Roundup on, Roundup's systemic. So it goes right down through the roots and kills a lot of this bacteria underneath, which is crucial for a healthy crop. Therefore, if you do that, you have to then supplement it with soluble fertilizers, which contribute to the river situation we've got. You have to then use more vermifuges, more chemicals, more antibiotics. You're putting trace elements in, all into the soil. And if you look at the average farming bill on a livestock farm, I think you'd be astonished how much money is spent on trying to keep life healthy, which with our other vast costs, we are helping to destroy the system that would keep them naturally healthy. If you go on to a lower external input system, and by that I mean buying off the back of a wagon, you have to look at planning and working hard internally on the farm. And that, to me, that means looking at how can you maximize everything on the farm? Can you do better grazing? Can you put in shelter to give you more shelter from winds, better keep livestock and ground warmer? Can you, put mixed herbs in? Can you manage clovers better? Can you manage livestock better? Can you put rotational grazing in? Can you, etc., etc., etc. Thousands of things you can do to help build a healthier farm and get away from the higher external inputs. Okay, Graham, that's yours. Those two are yours.
Good job there.
All right.
So we mentioned about trees. This picture is a baobab in South Africa. It's called the Tree of Life. It's just a wonderful image for the power of trees. It takes 48 people to circle the trunk of this beast. And this is, as you can see, in a very dry place, but still grows trees. If you look at the numbers, Canada at the top, nearly 9,000 trees per person. UK, 47 trees per person. We're not the worst place on planet Earth. Holland has less cover than we do. Iceland has less cover than we do. Malta has the least cover of any country in Europe. But it's a heck of a difference, isn't it? You know? And if we look at the UK as a whole, we're at 12%. England is less at 10%. That's a third of the rest of the European Union, as was. And compared to countries like Finland and Slovenia, where it's perfectly possible to have incredibly good farming alongside lots of trees. Somewhere along the way, we've lost the idea that trees are part of farms. Forestry and farming got turned into two different subjects. To my mind, that's totally wrong, and we need to reverse that. I took this photograph in Normandy in 1992, non à la mort des campagnes. Well, what you're looking at is a wheat field that stretches to the horizon, and I can just about see some trees about 5 miles away. The French farmers are notoriously bolshy, but no to the death of the countryside. This, to me, is the death of the countryside. Monocropping, no trees, no people. So we mentioned about carbon farm usage going up 8-fold. We are facing a carbon crisis in two ways. Firstly, because this is leading to climate change. And secondly, because our carbon resources, i.e. fossil fuels, are not going to get more. And yet more and more people in the world, of its growing population, aspire to have the same standards of living that they see in the industrialized West. If everybody in China used fossil fuels at the rate that Canada does, which is the most expensive country in terms of its fossil fuel usage, there will be no petrol or diesel for anybody else on planet Earth. And new discoveries are made, but each new discovery is a bit less than the ones that came before. Of course, people are working at things like electric cars and so on to try and find ways around this, but it is going to hit farmers hard if we don't diminish our carbon costs. And also the carbon costs of the chemicals that are used are enormous. 1/5 of CO2 emissions on the planet come from global supply chains. So it's not just food miles, it's not just that there's a cost to it financially. We are destroying our atmosphere through this consumerism. And we mentioned earlier on the effects of tillage. The less we till, the better. Let's keep the carbon in the ground. And there are two ways of looking at this. You've got direct emissions. So here, for example, livestock produce 5% of our CO2 just from their life. But when you take the life cycle, if we're talking broad scale farming, shipping things to somewhere else a long way away, you know, trucking stuff around the planet and so on, you know, suddenly it goes up from 5% to 14.5%. So life cycle emissions are something we need to be thinking about as well. It's not just about what happens on the farm. So how do we feel about this? Farmers matter. Consumers matter. Lots of other people in the cycle of land use matter. We'll have a look at who some of those are. All of these people deserve fair trade. I'm not sure they get it right now. Charlie?
I think that we've always operated on a single bottom line. Since, I mean, for years, we've just followed this sort of, which was once described to me as monofinance. We only have a single way at looking at profit and how things work. Many people now, from the resilient farmer in New Zealand and others, are looking at, we need a triple bottom line. We need to make a profit, of course we do, but it has to be socially just and environmentally sound as well, to have a decent farm that we can all share, all live on, and farmers can enjoy. Farmers actually like working with people by and large, and farmers actually like to think they're doing something good for the environment. Nobody goes into farming as a businessman, because, to be honest, it's a bit of a non sequitur, really. But you can make money at it. You've got to be good. But if you can pull all these things in that Graham's got on this this slide: people, compatibility, equitability, viability, the profit, planet, people. If we can put all that together with the help of, we need the help of people, as I said at the beginning of this session, who are environmentalists or RSPB or woodlanders or water experts, or to help us work with this. And we can try to attract other people, either with diversification, which might be up for some of us, all different enterprises. The more different mouths eating grass you've got, the better. So if you've got a sheep farm, maybe you can encourage somebody on that would put on free range poultry, or etc., etc. So we need to develop a new way of looking at profit, and profit is not just money. Sorry, Graham, just 1 minute. Imagine if we're talking about the carbon capture, I've just come up with a quote here. Imagine there was a process that could remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, replace it with life-giving oxygen, support a robust soil microbiome, regenerate topsoil, enhance the nutrient density of food, restore water balance the landscape, and increase the profitability of agriculture. Fortunately, there is, and it's called photosynthesis. We need as much green as we can on the planet. Good picture, Graham.
Oh, I'm glad it prompted that thought, Charlie. So we need to create and keep living soil. If we're on a farm and this isn't what we have at the moment, it isn't going to happen overnight, but we need to plan for it to become that way more and more every day, as much as we can. And becoming chemical free is an essential part of doing that. Trading locally, apart from reducing food miles, it creates links between the producer and the consumer. People value what they get. My wife came home with some cheese the other day from Dunlop Farm in Dumfries and Galloway. Charlie was talking about big dairy farmers and so on. I mean, I love that. It's not just some camembert from somewhere in France. It's a cheese that's identified to the farm it came from. That to me is of value. and adding value on the farm as much as possible. We can look at people like Mackey's up in Aberdeenshire, where, you know, they started with cream, then it became ice cream, then it became chocolate, then there's a wind farm, you know, and they keep adding things in. Maitland Mackey was a wonderful man, and many other people are doing things similarly to add value on the farm, on-farm dairying, on-farm butchery, on-farm shops, but all the time trying to keep yield maximized. And yield is not tonnage through the farm gate. Yield is the difference between what you put in and what you got out. And it's possible to actually end up with reduced outputs from the farm, but actually greater yield. To make the soil live, minimize tillage, avoid bare soil. So cover crops, mulching, get the next crop in early. Plough as long as close to the contour as you can, or slightly off. I see so many farmers in this part of the world ploughing straight down 30-degree slopes, and then, you know, you come past after heavy rain and their topsoil's all running down the road. Permanent pasture, not monocropped Italian ryegrass. The value of trees for shelter, for holding water in the landscape, for the livestock to shelter beneath when it's cold or windy or when it's too hot. This adds to their body mass and therefore their productivity without doing more work. Polyculture, not monoculture, and the value of wildlife. Probably many of you have heard of willing workers on organic farms. These are the most productive ones in my garden, sitting in my hand. There are 2 tons of them in my garden, which is 800 square meters. Charlie.
Okay, there used to be an organisation in Holland that called itself LISA, and that's what it stands for, Low External Input Sustainable Agriculture. I've touched on this earlier, but what we're looking at now is the low external input, trying to reduce the inputs that we have to buy into the farm. But of those external inputs, you can easily have consultancy, advisors, etc. on the farm. But think hard before anything is purchased. I think a consultant's job nowadays is to look at a farm and see what can be maximized from the farm before you have to buy in something, rather than, or if you put on another 100 weight of this, you'll get, or whatever it is, kilos, you'll get so many more kilos output. It's not always the way it works out. And yeah, there you go. Graham, that's your picky, so.
Well, in England's green and pleasant land, yes, some of it is. 64% of the UK is farmland. It employs 2% of our population. Farmers are not, by and large, creaming it. There are a few farmers who farm on vast scales, who are huge earners of subsidy, but the average farmer, look at these numbers. It's a bit scary, isn't it? I was talking to a beef farmer from Jedburgh, who's a regional councillor here recently. He said they used to call them barley barons, now they call them cereal slaves. So everything has to be financially stable, or we've just got to get deeper and deeper up to our oxters in the brown stuff. So here's a few things which we've mentioned. On-farm processing. What can you add to the primary output? And just as Charlie suggested, that could be an on-farm business. It doesn't need to be your business, but the more that we can actually add value to the primary product at close to the source as possible, the more we encourage our rural economies, farm shops, you know, get more of the margin, folks. Eateries, farm shops attract people to a restaurant, for example, or just a cafe. And all of that opportunity to open up the countryside with things like on-farm bed and breakfast, you know, walks in the woodland, through the fields, whatever, perhaps then attracts craft workers. I know one guy in Somerset who has a holding that's 1/4 of an old acre, and he makes his living growing hazel and sells walking sticks, and he makes a good living. These kind of things keep people in the countryside. They reverse that process of loneliness. And in the process, we get these added value outputs. This is a farm shop in South Africa, by the way. I love this. Open, very noticeable. People understand more, they're educated. Everybody gets a sense of being custodians of the lands rather than mining it. Farmers get appreciated. There's a pleasure and fulfillment in the work. Get back to enjoying what you do. And customers become your salespeople because they know what you're doing and they value it. All these kind of knock-on effects helps village schools and shops stay open. Each job created in the countryside itself creates one more job in services, effectively. When people are healthier, they're happier. And also, this doesn't just have to be in the countryside. We can look at things like Detroit, where because of the collapse of the car industry, huge areas of Detroit are being turned back to farmland. The more we can have working farms within our cities and on their edges, the more it connects people who live very urban lives to understanding where their food comes from and valuing having it as a quality product. The net result of this is farmers are better off, not just financially, but in terms of less stress, and well-being is improved. And that makes it all much more attractive to young people. It's not a mistake that young people aren't going into farming. They can see how damaging it is to their parents' generation. We need to reverse that. So we're going for a virtuous circle. Look at the headlines: consumers, ethical producers, sharing value, quality product, consumers, farmers feel value, customers connect, and all of these things build the local economy incrementally. Charlie, do you want to just summarize that again?
Yeah, okay. We do need more local connections. It's a great opportunity if you can get children, woofers, whatever, young people, members of the public onto your farm and be able to talk to them, explain what you're doing. I was at a talk the other day and this lady said, who here went to school? And we all, yeah, we did. And what do you think a teacher does? I went, well, don't know, teachers? And she said, yeah, exactly. None of you know what a teachers were. You're all at school for 5 years. How do you think the public knows what you do on your farm? And they've never been there. We haven't a clue. We need to create local trading initiatives, jobs, collaboration, if not cooperation. We need to look at what else we can add on to the farm, if we can get people to work there. And encourage people to eat their landscape. If this is what you want your landscape to look like, eat the food that it produces. And try and get people to keep coming back to your community and where you are, or to your food. Okay, Graham, I'll let you take that one.
Okay.
I'm struggling to read it, that's why.
Oh dear. Just to point out that we're not all innovators. So one of the things that we're looking for in this process that we're suggesting is people who lead the way. Somebody said to me recently, all farmers have got binoculars because they're looking at what their neighbors are doing. So what we need is for the leaders in being early adopters to show that there is a better way of doing things and to be open about what they're doing, to influence others to change and to influence the policymakers so that how farmers are rewarded reflects the outcomes that we're talking about here, like great soil. And here's a few things we came across. I'm not going to go through the list, but there's a whole bunch of problems that farmers are faced with, but there are solutions for all of them. We just need to work at bringing them in piece by piece. The faster the better, but not so fast that the farmers go bankrupt in the process. So, your turn now, folks. We'll be looking for questions, points of view, anything we haven't dealt with. For example, we haven't spoken about wilding, rewilding here and so on. And we need strategic positions and goals and objectives that come from this. There's a set of links. I'm hoping that this PowerPoint will be shared with people. Thank you for listening. The future is in our hand. And do we want more industrial farming getting bigger and bigger? Or do we want something that's a bit more people scale and keeps our countryside alive?
Brilliant, Graham and Charlie. Thank you very much for that. So I'd like to invite everyone to put in any questions into the chat group. We have one from Lucy Crowther. Are there currently any schemes running to promote soil conservation in the UK?
What exactly do you mean by scheme, Lucy? Do you mean financial reward? Hello?
Lucy, you can mute yourself. Oh, the mic doesn't work.
Oh, my mic doesn't work. Well, could you type in the chat? I mean, there are organizations, organic farming groups and so on, people like the Permaculture Association who are encouraging people to do this. I'm not personally aware of any particular financial reward for it. There are some places where there are conservation measures, you know, that is all helpful too. Charlie, would you add anything to that?
I was just looking for something, but I think it was in Michael Gove's paper for Public Good. Is soil improving the soil and considered to be something that may well be covered in the next round of environmental grants? But your guess is as good as mine on that, if that'll ever happen.
I have another question from Inova. Are there any resources for consumers to find farms, shops and organisations following good practice that we can support?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, there are I don't know of any organisation dedicated to doing that. I know of organisations which do it as part of their wider remit. So, for example, my daughter works in the Green Shop in Berwick. It has a huge reputation in Berwickshire and Northumberland because they will not stock anything that's GM. They will not stock anything that's provably, that they can't prove has no GM in it. So, for example, Doddington's farm makes wonderful ice cream and cheese. They won't stock it because they cannot prove that there's no GM in their cattle feed. And so that's a reputation they have, but they're very generous with supporting local producers, and everybody who shops there is in a constant dialogue with the people in the store and so on, and they become emissaries for that particular business. But if you look at something like the cooperative movement, there used to be something called ICOM, Industrial Common Ownership Movement, which was about worker cooperatives. It got eaten up by the cooperative society, the thing that owns co-ops in the high street and the cooperative bank and so on. But they provide support services for this kind of thing. And there are some worker cooperatives like Suma who've done an amazing job helping other people to get started as on the same track as them as locally sourced food. I hope that's some help to the answer. Anna?
Can I just elaborate on my question real quick?
Yeah, sure. Please do.
So I'm what one might call a conscientious consumer, I guess. So what I would love is to be able to go to a website and find shops or farms in my area that I could visit and, you know, buy their goods, just especially with COVID on, you know, where you want to go is on an outside, a day out. So I'd like to find farms in Yorkshire where we could go for a quick visit and, you know, support them with our visit at the same time. But I don't know of any websites that are a resource like that where we can just find farms practicing these natural practices and support them with our money, essentially.
Yeah, you said Yorkshire. Whereabouts are you?
In York.
In York, okay. Well, you know, there's plenty of such things in and around that part of the world. I mean, my son, for example, lives in Bingley, and he's a research fellow at Leeds University. And, you know, he has a very good list of the places around him that are ethical. But I was just trying to find something here online, and I'll keep looking as we're talking, that there used to be a magazine called Ethical Consumer. And I don't know if it still exists or not.
It still runs.
Here we go. Yes, www.ethicalconsumer.org. I recommend you start there.
There are organisations like the Pasture Fed Livestock Association that have a list of everyone in the area. Everyone who's selling pasture fed meat is listed on that.
Okay, I'll have a look at the ethical one. It seems like there might be a gap in the market, or maybe we just don't know of it collectively for a website that appeals specifically to people like me, you know, looking for
that's what that website is.
tourism type things to do. Sorry, what's that?
That's what that website does, but I'm sure there's room for more.
Yeah, it's just the branding of ethical consumer seems a little broad, I guess, not specifically for tourism day out type things. But anyway, there's other questions, so I'll see my time.
So a question from John Thomas. John Thorns. Can the increase in atmospheric carbon be offset by increasing soil carbon rather than increasing carbon by planting trees? How would you suggest we increase soil carbon rather than reducing it?
John, could you explain to me how planting trees increases carbon?
I'm coming. Well, carbon's taken by the atmosphere into the trees, and then it goes into wood. And then while the tree's growing, the carbon's in the wood. But then when the tree dies, it goes somewhere else.
Okay, if you look at soil maps of the UK, you'll see that a lot of the most productive land is described as brown forest soils. They weren't brown forest soils because of leaf mold, they were brown forest soils because of lignin from the trees, whole trees decaying and becoming part of the soil. So yes, we have a big problem at the moment because we're talking about turning coal-fired power stations into burning wood. It's the same thing, you're quite right, they're burning carbon. It's just that we can grow wood slightly more quickly than we can produce coal, which takes a million years or so. So if all we're going to do is harvest the trees and burn them, then we are just releasing the carbon again. Meanwhile, if we actually practice sustainable forestry, so we do continuous cover forestry, we do mixed woodland of native species and not this total dominance of Sitka spruce, and we let trees grow to maturity as much as possible, and we harvest just what we need for basically woodwork, for construction, making furniture and so on, we would have a very different picture. You're quite right that the most sustainable thing is for the carbon to be in the soil. And that's what we constantly try to do in the sites I've worked on across 5 continents, is get people to be building the carbon content of the soil. And the things that we spoke about earlier, minimizing tillage, cover cropping, and so on, are absolutely designed to do that. But for that to really work, it's essential to stop chemical farming completely. And that's when you get a living soil, and that's what stores the carbon, the organic matter, as Charlie said, but all the living things that are in it. Masanobu Fukuoka, the great Japanese agronomist, who's not with us anymore, but his One Straw Revolution and Natural Way of Farming are classics in their own way. He said farming is much more about growing people than it is about growing food. But he also said, people say you couldn't feed the world organically. And his records show, and the records on my land show, that actually it keeps getting more fertile over time. Of course, it's not a straight line. It goes up and down. Some years are better than others and so on. But the general pattern is upwards. My garden produces 16 tons per hectare pro rata, 500 trees for sale, 5,000 plants for sale, half our energy, and it's a teaching space and a soft living room. So my next door neighbour farmer, for all his John Deere tractors and all his chemicals, 8 tons a hectare. We actually need work for people that's meaningful and they can enjoy. So reversing that process of people leaving the land is part of the solution, and reducing the size of kit. I mean, that picture you saw of that John Deere tractor at the last slide there, my next door neighbour has one of those. You could go to the Boarding Union show and watch them salivating over these enormous machines, you know. No, literally, they do, you know. But he's farming 25,000 hectares, I think, all on contract, plus his own place. You know, there's one other person in Berwickshire doing much the same. So not only is the average age of farmers at 60, a lot of them aren't even farming anymore. It's all land's all let out, it's under contract. They are fixated on tonnage through the farm gate. They are fixated on production, but actually we need to find a way that we can communicate with these people that a living soil is the future of civilization. Libya and Tunisia were the breadbasket of the Roman Empire, desert. Syria was a forest kingdom, now mostly desert. The Tigris-Euphrates Delta, birthplace of Western agriculture, desert. You see the tanks driving into Baghdad, that's what was the Tigris-Euphrates Delta, and it's now dust. We've got to stop this now. Soil is the answer, you're right.
Okay, thank you.
One thing from that you were saying, Graham, is a recent thing with soils that's just come out of Rothamsted is the amount of organic matter in the soil. And they found that the NPK inputs have been affecting the soil glue. So the glomalin, which is part of the fungal network, and that's been really affected by the NPK. So we lose the whole carbon in the NPK, in the soil. So it's
this affects flocculation, the ability of soil to make particles, which creates pore space, drainage, holds onto organic material, holds onto water, resists flooding, resists drought. Without this, you just don't get good soil structure, which is vital.
A question from Michael with regards to bringing consumers and stakeholders on board. What messages have you found work best? There's a lot to take in around sustainable regenerative farming, and it's often difficult to know where to start.
Eat your countryside. If that's what you like, eat from it. If you want to eat from a desert in Israel, fine, buy it. So it's very, you can't explain everything to everyone, but if you want a countryside that looks like what you've got outside your window, Rod, people have got to eat the food that's produced there. Otherwise, it'll turn into something else.
One of the things we do here in the Borders is we set up a charity called Abundant Borders, which was designed to tackle issues about people in food poverty. And we discovered that food banks only supply tinned and dried food. They don't have the capacity to manage fresh produce. A lot of it's run by retired people, and it's mostly operated by faith communities that don't have the facilities to store things, and so on. So we've been going around each Borders town in turn and teaching people how to grow their own food, creating a community garden for them to grow their own food on land either gifted or on a peppercorn rent from somebody, and then teaching them how to cook better and properly. And it's amazing. I was expecting it to be older people who had to choose between heating and eating, but a lot of it is young men who are single, who either have mental health issues or substance abuse issues and so on. And some of them been thrown out the house, sometimes for the reverse. I mean, like young lad in Hoyk, thrown out of his home because after he finished school, he wanted to go to college to learn a trade, and his parents thought he should be out earning money. So they threw him out of the house. I mean, these are bizarre things. We can't change everybody's mind doing that. But, you know, every time, there's this old saying, you know, that if one person comes to your restaurant, for example, and doesn't like what you do, they'll tell 14 other people. If they like what they see, they might tell 8 other people. So if people aren't happy with your service, it's really good to hear from them, you know, and get good at listening to them. So it's about building bridges and between different parties, and a gentle introduction to the benefits of all that. So we've been in Eyemouth, we've been in Hoyk, we've been in Duns, we've been in Ayton, and all of these places now have committed groups of people who have land. We've had very generous assistance from Berwickshire Housing Association, from the Salvation Army. We were able to turn the Salvation Army shop in Hoyk. They had a big garden out the back full of 30 years worth of bonfires rubbish, you know, and we've turned that into a beautiful forest garden, and it belongs to the people. So making these kind of connections is important. And, you know, little things, you know, chats in a coffee shop, talking to local shops about whether they would stock what you're providing. Mark Shipley was on here earlier. I see he's gone. He's great at this stuff. He stays down near Hexham, and you know, he's always going into places and talking to people about what happens. But for every person that agrees with you, they're then going to tell other people. Our garden here in a normal year gets 1,000 visitors a year. How many people do they tell? This is what we need. Open access. We need farmers to feel safe with people coming to their farms to see what they do and learn.
Quite true.
We've got a question from Jane Oglesby. And the activity of grazing ruminants, grazing on pastures outdoors, increasing the carbon pulled down into the roots of the plants, allowing the animals to trample and manure the fields by grazing outdoors, pushes carbon-containing matter down into the soil to be broken down by fungi and microbes, and then used by plants to feed the next animal along. A lovely small cycle within the soil, and it needs no fossil fuels to do it.
Yeah, sorry, that was just a little comment to add to what you were saying to John about the trees and the long carbon cycles there.
It's very valuable. Thank you, Jane, and you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Had another question from Tam. Thinking of Charlie's comment about farmers not being able to control their markets, are there other ways, such as direct sales, farmers markets, online butchers, such as the Ethical Butcher, or perhaps promoting more local supply chains, even getting local supermarkets to stock local farm produce? You've partially answered that one already. But,
well,
yeah.
Indeed. I mean, an example just outside Kelso here, Pelham Farm, voted 5th best beef producer in the world. I mean, that's some tag, isn't it? You know, and they have an on-farm butchery and a shop. You can go there and buy, and you can only buy from them. You can buy from them mail order, or you can buy from them in specific locations like the Green Shop. You won't find them in a supermarket. So it's building those kind of links.
Yeah, I think I'm wondering how realistic it is, particularly for farmers. You know, how easy is it to kind of bypass the mainstream systems for selling produce and access, I guess, other ways of sales that give you more, that empower you, or give you more, give you more power in the market?
It's quite difficult. It's quite difficult when you're producing a lot of stuff. Some farmers get contracts with the supermarkets, which secures a better return. On-farm processing and direct sales doesn't take all of your produce if you're producing a reasonable number of stock. Supermarkets are okay, but it's supping with the devil. You need a long spoon because,
yes.
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
Because, no, I was just thinking that supermarkets are kind of part of the problem, but it feels like they could also be part of the solution.
It could be, but I think we'd need to change them around a bit. I did go to a supermarket once, and I can't remember which supermarket it was, but what they had was you went into the supermarket, and all up the left-hand side was privately run greengrocers, butchers, etc., etc., etc. When you went into the supermarket proper, it was all the tins and packages and frozen and what have you. But the advantage was you used the same free car park, it was in the same place, and you could carry your food straight into the back of your car. And I think if we could model that a bit more, so that the shops are in the supermarket or in the same car park, I think that there's an advantage there. I know it goes sort of towards shopping centres a la Australia and America, but it's where people go to buy food. They like the cheap, they like the free parking, they like just being able to carry it out. So I'm not sure if that's a solution, but I think it may be possibly one.
One of the effects of COVID where I live is that retail sales in small shops in this area have gone up 30%. And that's happening in corner shops all across the UK because people are more likely to go and shop locally and to support local businesses. And many of these businesses now deliver, something that years ago they used to do. And we're going back to that because the supermarkets have gone to it as well. And so, I mean, there's half a dozen businesses in Coldstream where I live, which is 1,600 people. Half a dozen businesses have started delivering food. And that's a huge change. They particularly make a point of favouring older people and people who are infirm in some way or other, and most of them don't charge for delivery either. But they're talking about places within a mile radius, you know. So, you know, there's one way. Another way which ought to work, but doesn't have a great track record in the UK, is cooperatives. So producer cooperatives, farmers marketing together and so on. In other parts of the world, it has worked better. Charlie was recommending me Gab Brown's book, Dirt to Soil, and he talks a lot about how they market through farmers cooperatives in North Dakota and so on. So it requires customer loyalty. It requires people to feel engaged. And one little point he makes is his son set up an egg business. You could buy a dozen eggs from a factory farm for 65 cents. His son sells a dozen eggs for $4.80 and has a successful business because people have understood how much better quality the food is and so on. So, you know, again, going back to Anna's point earlier, often the best way for these things to be promoted is locally. And so a national directory of local things would be desirable, but there are lots of local directories for these things in many parts of the country.
How do you think we might be able to change the auction mart system? Because it seems to me as though most farmers are going to the auction mart as a social event. We don't really have a clue what's going on. You sell your stock and it disappears off into some unknown quantity. And it seems really important that some sort of educational system at the auction marts could make a big difference so people realise what was happening.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of options if you can finish your stock. You can sell direct to butchers, some into restaurants, some here, some there, and direct to market or direct to the slaughterhouse and so on.
Yeah.
You've got options there. If you're a store producer, if everyone knows what I mean by a store producer, they get to a certain age, but your ground cannot get them fat enough without a lot of inputs, so you sell them off to somebody else to finish. That's where the livestock, it's difficult to get past that one, and people will buy them, but they like to have a selection. The buyer's like, have those instead, and and farmers are incredibly skeptical about getting the best price from a single deal. We like to bid for them. Like to see people bidding for them. So I don't know if it'll ever disappear. It nearly did in foot and mouth. We had online markets and people coming to take videos of your stock, but the minute it went back to livestock markets again. So I don't know. Just now you're not allowed in to sell them with this COVID. You drop them at the door and run away. So I don't know if that'll change people's attitudes or not. I'm not sure.
Charlie, can I just ask? Sorry.
Yeah.
Is that all right? Can I just ask a question about the finishing of? So, is the reason that the land isn't good enough to finish? Is that because the pasture isn't good enough? The grazing isn't good enough.
Where I am, the season isn't long enough.
Ah, okay. So that's
I need them to go onto better ground now to get going. Otherwise, I'd have to keep an extra 200 sheep just doing nothing from now on until the turn of the year. And that eats a lot of food, which could be given to breeding ewes, for example.
Right, I see.
That makes sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
To get your head around.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there anybody who hasn't spoken who would like to say something? Don't be nervous, don't be shy. Well, folks, thank you for your contributions and lots of good questions and good comments. As I said at the start, and you might not have all been here, it wasn't really just looking for questions of us, but also for things that you had to share, which contribute to the journey here. I just wondered if anybody wanted to say how well did this presentation fit with your purpose in being at this conference? It's called feedback.
Do feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to say something rather than having to type it.
Sorry, hi, Amelia. I think it's...
You're a little quiet, Amelia.
I know you mentioned that we might be able to... Can you hear me now?
That's better.
Yep. Is that better?
Yep.
Hi. So I think it's been really good. This is the first one I've gone into, and I thought it was really interesting, and it'd be great to get the PowerPoint if you were going to share it. That would be great.
Okay, I'm going to put my email address here in the chat. If for any reason it doesn't appear on the website, just email me and I'll send it to you.
All the sessions are being recorded, so after the conference you'll be able to
get the PowerPoint is the PowerPoint. I did ask Ellen yesterday if the PowerPoints could be shared as well.
Yeah.
Because there's one that came up yesterday, and I couldn't read it online. And I really wanted to know what it said. So, but if for any reason you don't get what you're looking for, just send me an email and I'll forward it to you.
Right.
Charlie, like to do some winding up?
Yeah, it's the first time that I've actually been involved in one of these, whatever it is, Zoom conferences, and I found it an interesting experience. And I hope that all you that tuned in got something from it. We're trying to get a little bit further along than just this is the disasters that are happening in the world, but to looking at, Graham and I put heads together and tried to come up with solutions as much as questions. And we hope some of that got through to most of you. But thanks very much. And also thank you to Graham for putting it all together.
Thank you very much, Graham and Charlie. It's been an excellent discussion and presentation. It's also a good thing for everyone to be aware of. I had a really interesting breakfast chat this morning. All sorts of exciting projects came up over breakfast. So do join all the other sessions, and lunchtime and breakfast sessions can be very revealing. But thank you very much, Graham and Charlie. It's been good to see you. Known you both many, many years.
Indeed, indeed.
Yeah, sorry, you don't know this, folks, but we go back, 30 years between us. And with over 200 years of experience between us on this stuff. I've just posted the link here also to the NASA film in case anybody wants to see it again or share it with other people. Thank you very much, people. Thank you for listening. Listening is much harder work than talking. And so I thank you for listening very attentively and for your time in joining us.